May 1945. The Third Reich is collapsing. The Russians are in Berlin. Hitler is dead. The war in Europe is technically over. But among the Allied commanders, there was a lingering fear. Intelligence reports spoke of a secret Nazi plan called the Alpenfestung, the National Redemption. The theory was that the fanatic SS troops and the Nazi elite would retreat to the Bavarian Alps, hole up in mountain fortresses filled with years of supplies, and fight a guerrilla war that could last for decades. The Allies raced south to crush this final resistance. They expected a bloodbath. They expected fanatical snipers on every peak. Instead, what they found was a party. The Alpine fortress wasn't a bunker. It was a luxury resort. It was Berchtesgaden, the home of the Eagle's Nest. And when the soldiers of the 101st Airborne and the French 2nd Armored Division kicked down the doors of Hitler's private mountain retreat, they didn't find They found the greatest stash of loot in the history of warfare. They found 10,000 bottles of the rarest wines, cognacs, and champagnes in the world. They found gold watches, cameras, and art. For the men who had survived D-Day and the frozen hell of Bastogne, this was the payoff. They spent the next week drinking the Führer's best vintage, sleeping in his silk sheets, and looting everything that wasn't bolted to the floor. Hi, I'm Ray. Today on G.I.Stories, we are attending the wildest victory party in history. Grab a glass. We are going to Berghof, Chapter 1. The Race for the Prize, by late April 1945. Everyone knew where the prize was, Berchtesgaden. This was the spiritual home of the Nazi Party. It was a complex of chalets and bunkers in the spectacular Bavarian Alps. It contained the Berghof, Hitler's main house, and perched on a sheer cliff 6,000 feet up, the Kelsten House, the Eagle's Nest. Capturing it was the ultimate symbolic victory, and it became a race. On one side, you had the U.S. 3rd Infantry Division. On the other, you had the U.S. 101st Airborne Division, including the famous Easy Company. And acting as the chaotic wild card, you had the French 2nd Armored Division under General Leclerc. The French were desperate to get there first. They wanted the honor of capturing Hitler's home to avenge the occupation of Paris. They drove their tanks recklessly, pushing American jeeps off the road, ignoring orders to stop. The Americans blocked roads to stop the French. The French drove through fields to bypass the Americans. It was a friendly rivalry, but it was tense. Everyone wanted to be the guy who sat in Hitler's chair. Who got there first? It's a debate that still causes bar fights between veterans. The French claim they arrived on the night of May 4th. The 3rd Infantry claims they raised the flag first on the morning of May 5th. The 101st claims they secured the town. But for the purpose of our story, it doesn't matter who was first. It matters who found the wine cellar. Chapter 2. The smoldering ruins. When the troops finally arrived at the Obersalzberg, they found a scene of destruction. The RF had bombed the area a few days earlier. The SS guards, before fleeing, had set fire to the Berghof. Hitler's famous living room with a giant window looking out over the mountains was a smoking shell. But the underground bunkers were intact, and the Eagle's Nest, sitting high above on the peak, was untouched. The soldiers began to explore. The first thing they realized was the sheer luxury. After fighting through the mud of France and the snow of Belgium, these boys from Kansas and Texas were walking on Persian rugs. They were seeing silver platters. The looting started immediately. Souvenir hunting was the polite term. Soldiers took silverware stamped with the initials O. They took stationery. They took linens. One soldier from the 3rd Infantry Division famously walked out with Hitler's top hat. Another took his globe. But the real treasure wasn't in the living room. It was behind a heavy steel door in the basement. Chapter 3. The Cave of Wonders. A group of paratroopers found a heavy door leading into the mountainside. They blew the lock. When the smoke cleared and they shined their flashlights inside, they gasped. It was a cavern, and it was filled, floor to ceiling, with bottles. This wasn't just a wine rack. It was the collected plunder of Europe. Hermann Göring and Martin Bormann had spent years stealing the finest vintages from France and Italy to stock the Führer's cellar. There were an estimated 10,000 to 12,000 bottles. We are talking about 1928 Moët and Chandon Champagne, Rothschild Bordeaux Sanche, Talafite cognacs that had been bottled before Napoleon was born. The estimated value in 1945 was millions of dollars. In today's money, priceless. Legend has it that Captain Lewis Nixon of his Campagnaman, known for his love of VAT 69 whiskey, was one of the first inside. Imagine his face. He had spent the war looking for a decent drink, and he had just stumbled into the Holy Grail. The order went out, trucks. Get the trucks. I want you to picture this. You are 19 years old. You grew up in the Great Depression. You've been eating cold beans out of a can for 2 years. Suddenly, you are holding a bottle of cognac worth more than your father's house. Dal you sabate? Dal you salite? No. You drink it. Right there. Out of the bottle. It is the ultimate act of disrespect to the dictator who tried to conquer the world. If you think these guys deserved every drop, smash the like button. Now, let's see how they got the loot down the mountain. Chapter 4. The Golden Elevator. While some were looting the Berghof cellar, others went up to the Eagle's Nest. To get there, you had to walk through a 400-foot marble tunnel and take a solid brass elevator inside the mountain. The elevator itself was a marvel. Polished metal, mirrors, green leather seats, the dirty, dusty G.I.s. piled in, boots muddying the floor. At the top, the Eagle's Nest was pristine. The French Second Army arrived and started dismantling the place. They didn't just take small items, they took furniture. There are reports of French tanks driving down the mountain with giant Persian carpets rolled up on the back of the hull and grandfather clocks strapped to the turret. The Americans were more focused on the lifestyle. They dragged lounge chairs onto the terrace. They sat where Hitler used to sit, looking at the Alps, smoking cigars, and drinking champagne. It was surreal. The war was technically still happening in some pockets, but here, it was a frat party. Major Dick Winters, the commander of Easy Company, famously took a set of silverware. He was a teetotaler, so he let his men handle the liquid assets. And handle it they did. Chapter 5. The logistics of looting the problem was transport. How do you move 10,000 bottles of wine? The soldiers emptied their ammo crates. They threw away grenades to make room for Burgundy. Jeeps were sagging under the weight. Every soldier's backpack clinked when he walked. But it wasn't just wine. They found Göring's private stash of art. They found Hitler's collection of pornography. They found a room filled with nothing but high-end cameras. They found cars. One American sergeant found Hermann Göring's bulletproof Mercedes-Benz. He hotwired it and drove it around the mountain roads, honking the horn, with a bottle of champagne in one hand. The irreverence was total. There is a famous photo of war correspondent Lee Miller. She went into Hitler's apartment and took a bath in his bathtub. Her boots, covered in the dirt of the Dachau concentration camp, were sitting on his pristine bath mat. It was a powerful message. We are here. We won. And we are washing our filth in your luxury. Chapter 6. The Hangover. For about 48 hours, Berchtesgaden was the drunkest place on earth. The roads leading out of the complex were ordained surnots because of mines, but because of drunk driving. G.I.s. were crashing jeeps into trees. Tanks were swerving. Officers tried to restore order, but it was impossible. Even the officers were carrying cases of cognac. Eventually, the high command stepped in. The party had to end. The area was designated for occupation duty. Checkpoints were set up to stop the looting. Confiscation points were established where soldiers were forced to dump their loot. It was a tragedy. Thousands of bottles were smashed or confiscated by MPs. But the smart soldiers, the veterans, knew how to hide things. They hid bottles inside the gas tanks of their trucks. They sewed them into their mattresses. They mailed them home, labeled as medical supplies. Years later, veterans would tell stories of opening a dusty bottle of 1930 Riesling at a family Christmas in Ohio. Where did you get this, Grandpa? Oh, I picked it up at a little place in the Alps. Chapter 7. The symbolism. Why does this story matter? It's just looting, right? No. It's closure. The Nazis built their regime on the idea of superiority. They stole the wealth of Europe to build their paradise in the Alps. They thought They were untouchable gods for a coal miner from Pennsylvania or a farm boy from Oklahoma to sit in their chairs and drink their wine. That was the ultimate defeat of fascism. It proved that the master race had been beaten by the common man. Today, the Eagle's Nest is a restaurant. You can go there, you can drink a beer on the terrace. But the wine cellar is empty. The 101st Airborne and the French 2nd Armored made sure of that. Conclusion. So here is a toast to the boys of 1945. They fought hard. WWII, hard. And when the end finally came, they partied hard. They earned every single drop. What would you have taken from the Eagle's Nest? The wine? The silverware? The car? Let me know in the comments. And if you've enjoyed this journey through the weird, wild, and heroic history of the GI, make sure to subscribe. We are digging up new files every day. This is Ray. Cheers. Dismissed.